Back in 2007, I worked part-time as an aide for a hospital in downtown Chicago. I was 19 years old, and I would basically assist patients with proper care when it came to food, water, or just a general checkup. Sometimes I'd have to deal with really weird and angry patients because they felt entitled to something. This was a lot more common in older people, and while it got me annoyed, I had to understand their situation. Most of the time, I'd be running back and forth with food and drinks and only got an hour break. One day, my manager had said that there had been a new patient who had just been admitted. She was an older woman, maybe mid-70s, and was obsessed with her daughter Sarah. She would talk about Sarah every day and claim how she was a sweet girl. Unfortunately, however, Sarah had sadly passed away many years back, and she was never able to move past it. We of course felt sympathy for her and always listened to her for support. One day, she had been transferred over to the ICU as she was unfortunately getting sicker, and after a few weeks she passed. My colleagues and I were deeply saddened about her passing and grieved for about a week. Eventually, we sort of ended up moving past it and continued with our regular work routine. It wasn't until a month later, where I had been sweeping the floors, when I see what appeared to be a small child from down the hall. She wore a pink skirt and a white shirt. I was rightfully confused, as there weren't supposed to be any children on this floor, and I wasn't sure if she was lost. Keep in mind that it was well past visitor hours, so I knew that she couldn't have been with any visitors. She just stood there at the end of the hallway staring directly at me, and the second I approach her, she runs into a nearby room. Now, I wasn't just gonna let a young girl into a random patient's room, so I walk over and enter the same room she had. Upon entering this room, however, was not a soul. It was an empty room with a single hospital bed and TV. I call out for the girl, only to not get a response, and that's when I started to get a little bit creeped out. I checked the bathroom and even went as far as checking under the bed, only to find no one. That's when I call it in and report a loose child on the floor, and that if anyone else saw her, to report it. However, even after several people looking for her, nobody was able to find her. The creepiest thing about it, though, was when I checked the security cameras and reviewed the footage from when I encountered the girl. The camera showed me from one end of the hallway trying to grab her attention. The only problem? The girl I had seen wasn't even shown in the damn footage. I freaked the hell out and informed my supervisor about it, but he laughed it off as me playing a joke. No matter how many times I denied it, he still wouldn't believe me. Till this day, I'm strongly convinced that this girl I had seen was in fact the lady's young daughter, Sarah. Since her passing, I'd like to think it was her daughter who I saw, and that she was here as a sort of thank you message for looking after her mom. There's only been one other colleague who believed me, primarily because he had seen her too. A couple weeks back, my coworker had gone down to the basement of the hospital where we commonly collected medical supplies. Upon going down there, he had said he had seen a girl in a pink skirt running around, which scared the crap out of him. He hadn't reported it to anyone, as he thought people would call him crazy. I haven't seen Sarah since then, but I've noticed minor things go missing in patients' rooms that I was sure I hadn't touched. Pillows, candy wrappers, and even a few water bottles. It very well just could have been another aide, but I've always wondered about that. So, I've been working at a general hospital for about 6 years now. For this story, I won't be disclosing the name of the hospital for privacy reasons, but this took place in a not-so-great area of Philadelphia. Those who live or have been around Philly will probably know what I'm talking about. Drugs, high crime, and constant sirens being heard several times a week. The hospital even had to hire police due to gun violence that took place around the area. Anyway, I'm 35, and while my job was rewarding, it was very stressful at times, causing my energy to practically drain. I work security at the hospital where my job would put me in the psych ward, morgue, and ER. My shifts would constantly be all over the place, but it paid well and was enough to keep a roof over my head. Because of the area the hospital was located in, it sort of abused our security contract and had us do some things we probably shouldn't be doing. One night, I received a call from the ICU that a patient had recently passed away, so I was responsible for bagging the body. The man who passed was an older man, I'd say mid-60s. I didn't ask how he died because, honestly, it's not my problem or concern. That being said, I slapped on my gloves and got him into the body bag. Before zipping the bag, I stop and stare at him. For some reason, I felt both odd and uncomfortable. I've dealt with many bodies before, but for some reason, this one just made me feel extremely disturbed. Anyway, I bagged the body for the funeral home and dragged him down to the morgue. Obviously, I followed procedures as instructed and placed him into the freezer. When waiting for the funeral home, it's required that we remain inside the morgue with the body until arrival. I know, it's a stupid and unnecessary rule, but it is what it is, I guess. Once the funeral home arrived, I brought them to the freezer where I would transfer the body to their possession. It's easier said than done because you have to carefully move the body in a certain way to ensure safety. After that, we normally just bring them to the morgue, have them sign, and pick them up to put them on the cart. So I pull my new friend out of the freezer for the funeral home and things immediately start to get weird. The funeral home claimed I had the wrong body and I'm just like, what the hell? I mean, there was no way it was the wrong body. There were only 2 bodies in the freezer, the other being a 16-year-old who had been hit by a goddamn train. So there was no way I had messed this up. After several accusations, the funeral home realized I had the right body. I mean, come on, it's kinda hard not to. There's literally a tag with their name on it, which the man looked at for a solid minute before even agreeing. Suddenly, one of the men from the funeral home unzipped the bag and was forced to take a step back. The man I had just placed in the morgue was contorted. His arm was now behind his back, laying on his right side, and his left arm in front of him. His mouth was hung frozen all the way down with his eyes bulging. My mind raced. How could this be? I laid him in the bag with his arms on his side. Before you say someone else touched the body, you're wrong. I was the only officer on duty and I had the only key to the freezer, so I was the only one with access. I would never be disrespectful or unprofessional. And to adjust his mouth and arms like that? How could his body possibly have been contorted? The funeral manager began to go off on me about how it was possible I could be such a scumbag to leave the body in such a manner. I just stood there silently as they re-zipped the bag and left. I got written up by my head director for tampering with a body, even though I tried to explain that I didn't do it. However, he didn't really want to hear it. Till this day, I'm still in shock about it, as it's simply impossible to know what actually happened. This incident will forever haunt me, and I still haven't gotten over it. So I've been an RN at a general hospital for about 3 years now. It's one of the toughest, although yet rewarding jobs I've had while assisting people in serious conditions. Most of the time, you'd pretty much be caring for patients and administering medication for them. We've had several people come in on late nights complaining about fibromyalgia and other common conditions that could easily be treated at home. I'd often deal with these types of people just by giving them simple over-the-counter medication if they had insurance. However, there were a few times where you'd have to treat patients who were in actual need. Treating patients not only makes you feel rewarded, but you also sometimes develop a bond with them. This story has the same principle. One time, I had cared for an elderly woman whose husband just died and was admitted to the hospital from a severe bacterial infection. Her name was Kate, and she was the sweetest little lady you could ever meet and would always tell us stories about her animals she used to own. She always loved animals and used them as a sort of coping mechanism. However, other than service animals, the hospital wouldn't allow any other pets, which made her profoundly sad. I felt so bad for her, as ever since she had arrived, she was also kind to us regardless of what she was dealing with. Over the past week or so, I really started to develop an emotional connection with her, so I would always be sure to show her extra attention. It was wholesome, but as a nurse, it's our responsibility to be there for patients. One day, she looked at me nearly crying and thanked me for all I've done for her. This utterly shocked me and left me in complete disbelief as I soon began to realize what she meant by that. She passed away a day later, and I cried for nearly a week. The other nurses were sad, but not as much as I was, seeing as I was one of the people she truly cared for. Weeks went by, and I simply moved on from her. She'd oftentimes pop in my head every now and then, but I mostly moved forward as being a nurse was busy. One night, I was speaking with one of my colleagues by the front desk about a patient's chart when she told me to get a piece of equipment from the basement. The basement of the hospital is where we usually keep our equipment and other medical supplies for storage. They aren't common in most hospitals, but they exist. It's very rare for one of us to go down to the basement, so this meant that we needed something pretty important. So I take the elevator all the way down to the basement and turn on the lights when I get this eerie feeling. I've been in the basement many times, and I've never had a feeling like this. To best describe it, it felt like a sense of dread coming from somewhere in here, but I wasn't sure where. To be fair, basements are creepy, especially the ones from a hospital. I go down this little hallway we have and grab the equipment sitting on one of the shelves when I could have sworn I heard footsteps behind me. However, they didn't sound like someone with shoes, but rather barefoot. I figure it's one of my coworkers playing a joke in an attempt to scare me. However, instead of getting mad, I thought I'd backfire their plan and catch them in the act. I walk out of the room and back out into the main area where I don't see anyone. At some point, I yell out, "Hello? Anyone else in here?" As expected, however, I get no response, which only wanted to make me leave faster. At this point, I'm questioning if it was just sounds from the electrical panels, and with that, I make my way over to the elevator. As I'm about halfway there, I hear clear as day the voice of an old woman shout my name from down the hall.
Sarah!
It only took me a good second to realize that it sounded like none other than Kate. I can say with certainty that I'm officially creeped the hell out, and I hurried back to my station. I didn't bother telling anyone about it, thinking they'd think I'm crazy. However, I know what I heard. It sounded too real for me to be imagining it. The only other person I told was a nurse who I had worked with only because she was one of the people who I trusted dearly. Based on my expression while telling her, I think she believed there was some truth to it, as she seemed to fully understand. Needless to say, that was my last time going down into the basement. Whenever I get asked to go down to the basement again, I always get another person to do it. Every time someone else did it, I'd always get looks, but quite frankly, I don't care. I've never believed in the paranormal, but I still have no explanation for this.